Well, hello everyone, and I want to get right into this. I'm ready to go ahead and attach this onto the hull. There are going to be some gap issues here that's very obvious, so I'm going to have to work with that. So I'm going to take this aluminum foil and wrap to protect the fibers, because I'm going to have to use CA to glue this down, because this is resin parts on here and you have to use CA to glue resin. So I don't want the fumes or the CA getting onto the fiber, because that can damage the fiber. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap that up and then put CA on here and get this piece glued into place, and then deal with the light blocking. Well, I've got I've got the thing glued on, and I've done a lot of light blocking with Tulip on here, and I just wanted to show everyone what this is going to look like. Obviously I have touch-up painting that I need to do on the hull, because I've got some scrapes and stuff on there, and so I'll need to do a little bit of sanding and touch that up. The grill I'll probably touch up very carefully with a little airbrushing and maybe a little paintbrush work. But overall, I can now say that I think I've got all the light issues taken care of. This piece sitting down on top of this, there were some major gaps between the bottom and the hull part, and I just couldn't get it closed up completely. So I've used Tulip to fill those in, and gone back with a Q-tip and a micro brush, both dipped in acetone, to wipe down those areas with the Tulip and get them smooth before the Tulip fully set up. So now I'll be able to go in and just take care of the touch-up paint, and that should be pretty good. Now, in case you're wondering, the fiber optics are not on. I don't have those lit up at the moment, but the floodlights are lit up and the grill is lit up, and that's overall looking pretty nice. I'm happy with that. Well, I've got it together in terms of the wiring harnesses. For the top one are done. And they're ready to connect to the ones in here. So I'm going to solder those together, and once that's done, then I'll be able to close up this hull. I have coated my main power leads, where everything's coming together on my wiring harness, with Tulip Slick, the acrylic fabric paint, which will insulate that nicely. So I just need to let those set up and dry, and I'll be able to go ahead and close it together. Well, now I've gone ahead and glued this on. I've glued it on this top part with 5-minute epoxy. I've glued one section at a time. First the front bulkhead, and then here on the starboard side I glued that down with 5-minute epoxy, and glued on the back, and now I'm gluing over here on the port side, where I have all the clamps and the blue tape holding that down in place. That's setting up really good, and I'm really happy with it. Okay, now that I've got the hull fastened down, I have to deal with these gap issues. Now, here on the starboard side, the gap is rather large, and it wouldn't have been so large if I would have accepted these panel lines not to line up, because it naturally wanted to go together with this top part farther forward, and then the panel lines wouldn't line up properly. So I went ahead and lined them up properly and glued it in place with the 5-minute epoxy. So now I'm going to have to go back in and fill this and set this up where I can sculpt this down and get this side taken care of. On the opposite side, I've got a much better seam. The gap is much smaller and will require less effort. So this side does not flex at all once I put the epoxy in there. It is solid as a rock. So this one I will probably work with Bondo, except for back here on this edge back here where there's this gap. This section I'm going to fill with Abe's Epoxy Sculpt, so that it'll be very hard, and I can sculpt it to fit just the way I need it to look, and fit in that seam, and I can bring it out to a point rather easy. You can't really do that with the Bondo products. At least I've not been successful at doing it. And I'll use the AVES over here on this side too to get this point back together again and restore that, and probably at the front side too on both of them, so that I can get that nice and solid. The inner sections here I will probably just fill with Bondo, because this too no longer really flexes since I put the epoxy in there, and it's very solid. So that's what I'm going to do. So this is the product that I'm going to use. It's AVES Epoxy Sculpt, and this is a two-part product. The dark, the black, and the white. And I'm going to use this. You mix these in equal parts, and it gives you a long work time, so you can sculpt it, and it completely hardens up in about 24 hours and everything, so that works well. There's also a solvent that I have from AVES that you can use to clean this up. This product is excellent when you want to fill something and you want it to be super hard, and it helps with structural issues. It gets hard almost like concrete. It's very hard, so you got to make sure you work it and get it shaped and everything just the way you want it while it's still workable, and you have a long time to do that, and you can delay that hardening by using the safety solvent and or water on the product as well. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mix these up in equal parts for just enough to fill those gaps, and we'll be moving forward. Here's my epoxy sculpt. I have mixed the two parts together. You just knead them together and get them fully mixed, and once you do that, the curing process will start. But this has a very long working time, so it's going to be relatively easy to do. Obviously, I mixed up a lot more than what I needed to for this. So now I'm going to roll it out in a nice little bead, and get it down to really thin, in that vein right there, about that much, so that I can then take it and work it in with my tools, work it into the crack and get it nice and smooth in there, put in. Then I'll come back with some safety solvent, and I'll wipe this down and everything, and wipe that down and blend it, try to get that as close as I possibly can to the hole contours and everything. Well, because I had mixed up too much epoxy sculpt, I decided to go ahead and fill in the whole gap with that. And as you can see, I've got it a little bit lower here, because I will come back and put some of the red putty on top of that after it hardens, just to smooth that out nicely. But I have gone ahead and sculpted in the cross pieces here for these panels, and lined them up and cut them out. And these I'll clean up slightly after it hardens up some with my diamond files. But overall, I've got a nice surface on top, and a nice surface coming up the edge, filling those in. And unfortunately, I don't think I can get the camera close enough that shows that really well. But in person, you can see, like right here, the little wall seams I've created, the uplifts with the raised detail, and filled that in. So that should end up looking pretty good. And I used just little sections of the epoxy sculpt, going all the way up and down, putting it in a little bit at a time to fill that in. And I have a little bit of bump right here on the end. I need to take care of that, so I'm going to dip my X-Acto blade into some of the epoxy sculpt solvent. Just make sure that I have that squared off nicely. There we go. And you can't see it too good. The camera, I can't get the camera close enough on it, but that's edged off right now, and it looks a little blurry because it's got the liquid epoxy sculpt solvent on there. But that looks pretty good. Just a little bit of cleanup after it hardens, a little bit of red putty with a little bit of sanding, and that should end up looking really, really good. So I'm happy with that. So the next one to do will be this one right here. So I'll go ahead and get working on that, so you can see what that's going to look like. Well, here it is set up, and I've gone ahead and cleaned some of this up. I need to go back now with the red putty and fill in to bring it right up to the level here and get that smoothed out, which you can see from the shadow line. These have been retrenched with the diamond files and everything. And they're now lined up and looking pretty good. Done the same thing over here on the port side. I've gone ahead and removed some of the paint with some acetone so I could see the lines, see what I was doing a little bit more, because when I had it partly sanded off, it was just a little bit difficult to see to make sure they were good and straight. So I went ahead and removed the paint, which wasn't on very thick at all, but it was just a visual thing with my old eyes, making sure I could see everything really well. So that's pretty good. I need to go back in and fill a few little gaps with some red putty and smooth this back out, and this should be done, and I'll be able to start taking care of the light gaps that are up here I mentioned earlier, which this will be real easy to take care of. This right here takes a little bit more work because you have to do some sculpting with it, but there we go. Let me go ahead and get some red putty on there and get that setting up, and we'll move on. Well, using Tulip Slick, which is an acrylic based product that you can get at any craft store, I've gone ahead and filled in part of this right here. You can see this was all red like this over here and was red all the way across, and now I've got just a little bit of gap right here, and I've got to fill that in there. I had the same situation going on over here on the opposite side. Little J.J. Abrams lens flare going on there. Right through here, and I filled that in quite nicely, and I'm getting no light leaks on that side whatsoever. So now all I need to do is go back and add a little bit right there and a little bit right here, and all I use is, as I said, I use the Tulip, and it comes with this nice point. You can also put this in a syringe with a wide mouth needle and use that to get it into tight places. And then I shave down the end of a very thin toothpick to get to a nice little point, so that as I'm working this, I can work this into the joint, make sure it's nice and covered, and then I go back with a wet Q-tip that I dip in water and tap out so that I don't get a lot of running water, and then I just come back in and clean up the seam like this right here, working on it, and it gets it all nice and smooth and clean and ready for painting. So now I need to go ahead and, as I said, add a little bit more here, and then this side will be finished. Now I just got done adding it right in here, and I just want to make sure that I get it nice and in the joint, and I got it back up under here where you can no longer see a light leak at all, and that's perfect. So now I'm going to take my Q-tip and just dip it in water and tap it down after I dip it in water so I get excess off, and then I'm going to come right up here and I'm going to wipe this down, clean up that joint, and then come back up under here and clean off this joint nicely and all the parts so that there's no excess. There we go. And now that gap is filled for where I needed to fill it in here and right here. So now I need to flip the model over and fill the gap right up here underneath. Well, one of the things I needed to do was fill up the hole, which I should have done early on the underside of the hull where the original stand goes, which for me is too far forward. I wanted my brass rod farther back, and this is just temporary. This is going to get cut down some, I think. But anyway, the other issues was I went ahead and filled in the gaps along here, and used acetone, a little trick I learned from my friend Trekworks, Boyd, to smooth all that out, and it's just going to require a small amount of wet sanding, which I'll do when it sets up just a little bit more. And on the back side, I've gone ahead and taken care of a little bit of the light gap that I had between the this part right here, the shuttle bay, the resin parts, and the bulkhead back up underneath here. And I used the Tulip to block that. I put a small bead along the seam where the gap was at, not much of a gap, and then I went ahead and used a wet Q-tip like I showed before and wiped it down and everything, let that dry up, which is what I'm doing there. And I had a little bit of a gap right here, just a small amount letting light out, so I fixed that, and a little bit on the corresponding side as well. And I've gone ahead, this was not quite as smooth as I wanted it to, so I went ahead and put some red putty right here, and I'll be doing some more sanding on that. I've already sanded down the bottom seams. I forgot to do that. I had those all puttied up and forgot to do that. So when I flipped it over to work on it, I realized, oh yeah, I need to take care of that. So I went ahead and wet sanded all that down and everything. Those are nice and smooth on both sides, so I'm really pleased with that. So I'm just going to let this set and do a little bit more wet sanding, take care of finishing this right here, and then we'll move on. Well, I believe I'm done with the light blocking. I've got all of that taken care of around these areas that need to be buttoned up, and it all looks really good now. So overall, I think that's pretty much it. So next thing to do, I've got all the sanding done on it. Everything's smoothed out on the nacelles and everything. So the next issue is painting, and we'll be doing that next time. And I'll be using from TrekWorks his custom mixed paints called Cosmic Colors, and we'll be putting down a fresh coat of paint on top of the hull and doing all these panels with their different tones of paint, and we'll have to work that up. Boyd sent me some special paints to take care of that, to mix some colors specifically for that, and I'm looking forward to that. To me, that's going to be a lot of fun. So thanks for watching, everyone, and until next time, happy modeling.